Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this critical organizing call. My name is Shada Mahmoud. I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm honored to be joined by incredible organizers from World Beyond War, the Palestine Solidarity Network, and more. We're coming together at a pivotal moment. Since launching the Arms Embargo Now campaign a year ago, we forced a national conversation on Canada's complicity in genocide. We've seen hundreds of thousands mobilize. We've forced elected officials to respond, and we've disrupted business as usual. And while we've won some concessions, the arms are still flowing. The bombs are still falling. And Canadian made components are still being used to kill Palestinians in Gaza. We're here tonight because our work is not done. This webinar is about realignment, strategy. We're here to build, to organize, and to carry our demand forward under a new government. The demand hasn't changed. A full and immediate two-way arms embargo on Israel, not as a moral plea, but as a material and strategic intervention, as a form of sanction, as a concrete way to cut off complicity and stop the Israeli war machine at its root here in Canada. Thank you all again for being here. We're going to begin by grounding ourselves in the urgency of this moment. The context we organize from isn't abstract. It's unfolding live. So before we talk about next steps, we need to get clear on what's happening on the ground and why this campaign is so necessary. So next slide, please. This is a photo of what remains of 16-year-old Azhar Abdel Nasser. The Israeli bombardment was so extreme, so violent that his body disintegrated. There was nothing left to bury, only what could be wrapped in a shroud. His name, his age, written on a cloth. This is the brutality that we are confronting. This is the violence that Canada is helping to fund, arm, and shield. Next slide. You are joining this webinar as Gaza is being starved, bombed, and invaded in real time. In the last 72 hours, over 500 Palestinians have been killed. Israeli forces have launched their most violent ground offensive since October, pushing into Rafah, Khan Yunis, central Gaza, and North Gaza, targeting neighborhoods already flattened by months of airstrikes. This is not just an escalation. It's a continuation of a genocidal project that has never paused. And they're not just bombing Gaza. Gaza is starving. For 77 consecutive days, Israel has blocked food, water, fuel, and medicine from entering the strip. Children are dying of dehydration. Families are eating leaves. Surgeries are being conducted without anesthesia, and it is starvation by design and fully backed materially, diplomatically, and politically by the United States, by Europe, and by Canada. Canada is complicit. Canadian companies are manufacturing components that are used in these Israeli missiles, tanks, and drones. And the destruction is total. Just days ago, Israeli forces occupied and besieged the Indonesian hospital in the north in Beit Hanun, opening fire on its facilities and cutting off all movement. Patients and medical staff fled under fire to the next hospital, Kamel Adwan Hospital, which was then also attacked. And now the Ministry of Health has confirmed every single hospital in Gaza is now out of service. The Indonesian hospital was the last one. Next slide. Israeli airstrikes continue across Deir al-Balah, al-Zuwayda, al-Bureij refugee camp, and Khan Yunis, forcing people to flee again, displaced 15, 20, 30 times over. In the West Bank, during Suhoor and Fajr, Israeli forces raided Al-Naqar neighborhood in Qalqiliya, displacing families at gunpoint. In the past 3 days, 5 journalists have already been killed. And according to Gaza Civil Defense, hundreds of families have been erased from the civil registry, not just from the beginning of the genocide, but just in the past few months alone. Over 200 people remain missing under the rubble with no way to reach them. Next slide, please. This is not war. This is mass extermination. And Canada is a part of it. And that's why we're here. Not to reflect, not to wait, but to act for a full, immediate, and permanent two-way arms embargo on Israel that is not symbolic. A two-way arms embargo is the front line of sanctions. It is how we cut off weapons. It is how we shut down Canada's role in the genocide. It is how we say that you will not carry out these massacres with our hands. Tonight, we'll walk through where the campaign stands, what the new government has and hasn't done, and how we're building toward a coordinated pressure to ensure that Canada ends this complicity. This is not a moment for statements. It's a moment for strategy. It's not about waiting. It's about intervention, because Gaza is under fire, Gaza is starving, and we are organizing to shut it down. To talk more about how Canada fits into that picture and what our campaign has been doing, I'm going to pass it to Rachel Small from World Beyond War.
Thank you so much, Shada, for setting the context, but also for yours and like the Palestinian youth movement more broadly's incredible leadership over many years, but especially in the past year and a half, and frankly, especially within the Arms Embargo Now campaign. So yeah, while PYM, while certainly us at World Beyond War and many other groups had already been taking action to address the Canada-Israel trade before then, and I want to acknowledge that, it was actually exactly a year ago, last May, that was the official launch of the Arms Embargo Now campaign. So that was and remains an effort to bring together our cross-country efforts of hundreds of organizations across the country who endorsed, so that we could together push forward a clear, strong, united demand that would have material consequences, as Shada said, on Israel's genocide. And then, of course, to force the government to do it. So I'm going to share just a brief video for 3 minutes, and then I'm going to dig into a bit more detail about what have we won in the past year and what remains, and frankly, what is the true current state of the Canada-Israel arms trade, because it's not what the Liberal government has been telling us it is. But first, I'll share this video.
Since Israel's latest assault on Gaza began in October, Palestine Solidarity organizers have zeroed in on Canada's arms trade with Israel as a key site of struggle. More than 50 companies have been identified across the country that manufacture weapons, components, and military technology for export to Israel. When confronted about this complicity, government officials misled the public.
And we have not emitted any new export permits since October 7th.
And we have sent, since October 7th, non-lethal equipment, including night vision goggles and protective gears. And that was through Canadian companies.
Canadian companies produce vital parts of the fighter jets, warships, drones, and attack helicopters that are decimating Gaza right now. In the span of 2 months, Canada approved more arms export permits for Israel than they had in any year for the past 3 decades. At the same time, Canada has been signing new contracts to purchase weapons and military equipment from Israel, directly funding Israel's war machine.
We want justice, you say how? We want justice, you say how? End the occupation now!
Communities across Canada have written, phoned, and petitioned our MPs.
Palestine will be free.
We have held teach-ins, community meetings, and town halls. We have flyered, marched, picketed, and rallied at every government office you can name.
We call on Mayor Olivia Chow to be an advocate for a two-way arms embargo on Israel.
This collective power forced the Trudeau government to promise to end the approval of new military export permits. But they have yet to formalize this policy or stop the flow of arms that they had already approved. A full arms embargo will stop the flow of all military goods, both to and from Israel. It will close the loophole that allows military goods to reach Israel untracked and unreported via the US. And it will stop the funneling of our tax dollars into Israel's military industry.
Not another nickel, not another dime. No more arms for genocide.
Movement pressure is working, but the government of Canada has refused to act decisively to save Palestinian lives and impose a full arms embargo on Israel. We've had no choice but to escalate. People of conscience from coast to coast are taking action to shut down ports, rails, highways, and weapons factories.
All three Harris! Shut it down! We will not stop, we will not rest.
Occupying their university campuses, disrupting the arteries of the economy, and forcing our government's hand to stop the flow of weapons, money, and legitimacy to the Israeli war machine. Let's do this.
So I want to give a shout out here to the many, many, many tens of thousands, frankly, of people across the country, and I know many of the folks in this call are included in that, who, yeah, as we've just seen, are taking all sorts of actions to push for this, to push for an arms embargo, from those rail and weapons factory blockades to campus and government building occupations to the protests coming up later this month in Ottawa to shut down Canada's biggest military weapons fair. From the folks who have been flyering and picketing and hosting film screenings and flying kites and holding teach-ins and sending many thousands of postcards, the folks marching on the streets every week. This is a movement that includes all of us. And the Arms Embargo Now campaign is part of a much bigger ecosystem of people who are doing literally everything they can to end Canada's complicity in genocide. And together, that's where we have that strength. And of course, in addition to those movement actions across country, the Arms Embargo Now campaign itself has held 3 days of action. One was involved hundreds of folks going to different members of parliament offices, another targeted weapons factories, another involved burdogging MPs on their summer break and on the campaign trail. And local groups have been organizing up a storm in their own ridings. And by the time of the recent election, they had succeeded in pushing nearly 50 members of parliament to formally sign on to the call for a full arms embargo. So over the past year, that's some of the work that has happened. And importantly, this campaign, the Arms Embargo Now campaign, has had several significant wins that have forced the government to do a bit of what it was determined not to cut back the Canada-Israel arms trade bit by bit and really move some steps closer to an arms embargo. Firstly, I should say that we have together, collectively, over the past year, taken what was initially labeled a radical, an extremist, an unrealistic demand, those are real quotes, and made it, frankly, a mainstream policy demand. Every major news outlet at this point in the country has now been forced to report seriously and many, many times over on the idea, on the demand of an arms embargo on Israel, and as that being a serious prospect for this country. And we've absolutely won the moral battle here. This is cleared not only through, for instance, the recent national polls that showed that a majority of Canadians support an arms embargo on Israel, but also by the fact that if you look at what the Canadian government has now been forced to say for months, right? Because you may notice they're no longer taking it as a given that Canada is going to keep arming one of its closest international allies, Israel. They're no longer, frankly, even trying to justify why Canada should continue arming Israel, which was the standard for Canada for decades, right? And it was, in fact, unimaginable, even a couple years ago, that the Canadian government, again, one of Israel's biggest allied countries and a NATO member, would be saying what they're now saying, which is that Canada cannot be arming Israel. And the government has used every trick in the books over the past few months, over the past year, to act as though they're not, right? To act as though Canada has stopped arming Israel. That's not actually the case. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I do want to note that it's huge that we have made it completely unacceptable for Canada to be arming Israel, such that the Liberal government is forced to now try to convince us that they're not doing that. But in terms of some concrete wins, like actual cutbacks to the arms trade, I want to just quickly outline some of what we've achieved. As briefly mentioned in that video, we've forced the government to pause issuing any new arms export permits. So when this first happened, this was significant because it was a really powerful statement of dissent. People and countries around the world took notice. Netanyahu completely freaked out. It was like on front page of Israeli newspapers. It was one of, if not the strongest demonstrations of unwillingness on the part of the Canadian state to materially support Israel's attacks on Palestine that Canada had done in decades. And it was very significant on the world stage. However, when this pause on new permits came into effect, it was not yet clear to us whether it was going to actually do anything meaningful to restrict the flow of weapons. The government had approved weapons export permits right before they put in place that pause on approving new ones. And the ones that had already been approved, they were still going to be sent, right? So we didn't know if this pause would just be in place for, who knows, a few weeks, a month, and then they would kind of sneakily unpause it, and it would have just been a gesture. However, and we just recently confirmed this, the pause is indeed still in effect. So that means it's now been over a year and 4 months that no company in Canada has been able to apply for a permit through the Canadian government to export their weapons to Israel. That's significant, and that has certainly impacted. I mean, the Canadian weapons companies are highly displeased about it, and we know that. That's something material and impactful that we have achieved. And meanwhile, those previous permits I had mentioned that were approved before they stopped approving new ones, those are slowly expiring. So there's kind of fewer and fewer of those still available for those companies to use to export their weapons as time goes on. And in terms of those permits that had already been approved, we a few months later when we sort of highlighted what some of those were for, how they had approved all these right before they put in the pause, when we highlighted that hypocrisy, former Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly came back and ended up suspending 30 of those existing permits. Another win was highlighting when we highlighted a contract that we found out about kind of by fluke for explosives to be produced at a Quebec General Dynamics factory and then sent to Israel via the US, sort of bypassing that permit process. Our movement made an uproar and forced the Canadian government to block that contract. At the same time that all of this organizing that I've mentioned has been happening, there's been some other aspects of this campaign that have happening as well that I think are important to mention. So at the same time, for instance, that we are gathering thousands strong and protesting outside our MP offices, our allies and fellow members of the Arms Embargo Now campaign are lobbying in Ottawa, are having meetings with those MPs, are having meetings with Global Affairs Canada, are pushing on the inside. And right now, with the list of MPs who have already signed on to the demand for an arms embargo, there's again work within Ottawa to bring those MPs together behind the scenes so that they can actually push the government to do more using their power as MPs. There also has been incredible work in the courtroom. There's a really powerful lawsuit that is suing the Canadian government right now in federal courts for not following their own arms export laws. I mentioned that just to put all of our work in context, right? We're part of a bigger movement and there's multiple angles that are being pushed, all leading towards the same horizon of an absolute end to Canada's arms trade with Israel. So the last thing I'm gonna do is just make sure we're all totally clear on what is the current state of the Canada-Israel arms trade. It has been very hard to be clear on this because, as I mentioned earlier, the Liberal government has done everything they can to try to give the appearance that they have stopped arming Israel. So there are 3 real dimensions of how the Canada-Israel arms trade works. So as per this slide, the first one is how a majority of the weapons actually flow from Canada to Israel, which is that they are made in Canada, and it can be full weapons or it can be components, chunks of weapons. They are exported to the US as part of the ginormous Canada-US arms trade, and then the US adds them into, let's say, a fighter jet and sends them to Israel, or simply as part of its bigger package, let's say, of explosives to Israel, adds in the Canadian ones that it imported and sends those off to Israel. So to put this in context, Canada exports over $1 billion of military goods to the US, and the exact number is not published. It might be way more than $1 billion, but it's at least $1 billion. And those in general do not have permits, are not regulated. Nobody's tracking their final destination because Canada has this cozy agreement with the US that we can just export any military goods to them without oversight. So all those exports, they're integrated into literally hundreds of weapon systems, whether we're talking about drones, warships, fighter jets, missiles, etc. Many of those weapons stay in the US, but many of them also are sent on to Israel. So for example, the example I gave earlier about the contract for explosives we found out about that was going to be produced at a Quebec General Dynamics factory. That was a contract where the US was going to be buying all these explosives from this Quebec General Dynamics factory to bring to the US, and then a bunch were going to be sent to Israel. So that's one example of how this aspect of the Canada-Israel arms trade works. So as part of the demand for an arms embargo, the Canadian government has to block all weapons exports to Israel through the US. They need to make it immediately clear that any good being exported to the US that is bound for Israel is unacceptable and is blocked by Canadian law. That's something they can do immediately. So that's number one, all the stuff made in Canada that's going to the US and then going on to Israel. Number two is everything we've been talking about with the permits. If a Canadian weapons company is making something and is sending it directly to Israel, they need to get a weapons export permit from Global Affairs Canada. So this is where we were talking about, we upped our pressure and they stopped approving any new of those permits. But there are still some that were active from before. So that's kind of the example of that. And I mean, just to make this concrete, like in Toronto, for instance, is a factory that makes military circuit boards, and they export those directly to Elbit Systems, who uses them in their laser guidance kits. And that's what makes their general bombs into precision strike munitions. And those circuit boards are also in some of the fighter jets that Israel uses. So these are key components. They're made at a Toronto area factory. They get a permit from Global Affairs Canada, and then they export them directly to Elbit in Israel. So that's the other way that weapons go from Canada to Israel. And then the third aspect of the Canada-Israel arms trade is that Canada is continuing to buy weapons from Israel. This is us directly funding the Israeli war machine. We don't have the stats from the past 2 years because they have not been released. They've been censored. But as of 2 years ago, Canada was Israel's 6th largest weapons purchaser in the world. So that means that's hugely significant. And we know that Israel has been saying that how they're paying for this war, this genocide, is with arms sales, is with now being able to advertise their weapons as being battle tested on Palestinians and then selling them to countries like Canada. So when Canada just last year announced, hey, we're going to buy, for instance, $43 million of these missiles from Rafael, an Israeli company that's state-owned, that's as directly funding the Israeli war machine, that's as directly funding their genocide. So the Canadian government has to immediately cancel all these contracts for these weapons that they are buying for the Canadian military to use. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit where things are at. We have major work to do on number 1 and number 3. And it's with those direct exports from Canada to Israel, number 2, that's where we forced some major action from the government on those permits. But to put it in context, we still have our work cut out for us in terms of ending all of those exports going through the US, and we have to end all the purchases coming from Israel as well to achieve that full arms embargo. I'll stop for now.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So my name is Emma. I'm with the Palestine Solidarity Network, and I'm going to give us sort of a rundown now on the political landscape. As we all know, we've just come out of a critical federal election where we've been able to, stave off the worst case scenario of having a conservative government, and yet we know that the landscape and our sort of political analysis and opponents have really shifted. So what the landscape looks like within the House of Commons and how support has unfolded is very different now than it was even just a few months ago. So as many of you know, through this past federal election, the Palestine Solidarity Movement was really focused on pressuring all candidates across party lines to endorse the Palestine platform, one of which of those demands included a two-way arms embargo on Israel. This election was a major moment of unified activity across the movement. Over 20,000 people from coast to coast signed a pledge committing to only vote for candidates who supported this list of demands. Unfortunately, as I'm sure that many of you know, this election also really saw the decimation of the NDP and many key critical allies within the House of Commons who we have often been able to turn to in order to fight for this demand on Parliament Hill. And so now I'm going to talk through sort of where we find ourselves in terms of who is in office and what that means for us and our movement and our next steps. So like I said, we've lost a really significant amount of, pro-Palestine champions, folks like Matthew Green, Blake Desjardins here in Edmonton, where I'm based, Lindsay Matheson, and others. There are now, however, 33 MPs who have expressed support for a two-way arms embargo on Israel. And so that is either by signing on to the MP pledge to support a full and immediate arms embargo on Israel as part of the Arms Embargo Now campaign, or candidates who signed on to, endorsed the Palestine platform, which includes a two-way arms embargo. So there are 25 Liberal MPs as part of this 33, 7 of whom have endorsed the Palestine platform and endorsed as they were running, but have not yet signed on to the Arms Embargo Now pledge specifically. And therefore, these 7 are sort of primed and are a key focus to get them to fully endorse a full and immediate arms embargo and to form, a bloc that is fighting for this. And 3 of these 25 Liberal MPs are either cabinet ministers or secretaries of state. So that includes Shafkat Ali, who is a cabinet minister, Adam van Koverden, who is a secretary of state, and Joel Lightbound, I believe, who is also a cabinet minister. All 7 NDP MPs within the House of Commons have vocally supported the call for a two-way arms embargo on Israel. And we've seen the NDP really, lead on this and be calling for a variety of additional sanctions, right, on Netanyahu and his war cabinet. And the one Green MP that we have remaining, Elizabeth May, has also vocally supported a two-way arms embargo. And yet, as you can tell, there are many new MPs that are now entering the House of Commons. We've lost many who were vocal champions. And so this moment, for our movement is really a time of invitation. There are many new faces, including, my own MP is entering the House of Commons, a first-time MP who is now also a cabinet minister. And these are sort of critical moments in order for us to be reaching out with both an invitation to these MPs to stand on the right side of history and also a commitment as their constituents to continue to hold them accountable until they end Canada's complicity in the genocide. And so Johanna and I are going to talk a bit more about sort of proposed next steps for this campaign. But one thing to make really clear is that this is a window, a really, really crucial window where we don't want to sit back as people that are deeply committed to ending Canada's complicity in the genocide. We don't give any honeymoon phase to these members of Parliament. And yet we want them to know in an invitational way that they have an opportunity here, that they are being presented with in order to do the right thing, in order to respond to the deep kind of moral crisis in this moment, and to do what their constituents expect of them. So we're going to do this all together, all across the country. We're proposing that on June 5th, we deliver mandate letters to our MPs all across the country, signaling to them what we expect of them within the House of Commons, how we expect them to wield their power that they have now been afforded in order to impose a full and immediate arms embargo on Israel. So the idea of mandate letters, as I'm sure many of you already know, is that every sort of new government that sits, the Prime Minister of Canada will sit down and issue a mandate letter to every single one of their cabinet ministers, highlighting the political priorities and objectives for that minister and their entire department. And so that oftentimes, would be saying, we expect you to treat the climate crisis seriously. Here's how, here's what we've committed to Canadians. That's all well and good. And yet we think that it is absolutely necessary that all MPs receive a mandate letter from us, the people, the constituents, the people who they have to thank for even holding office in this moment. And so on June 5th, all across the country, whether it's 2 people or 75 outside of an MP's office, we will deliver them this mandate letter calling on them to impose an immediate arms embargo on Israel and to act as we've been saying, a very first critical sanction that needs to be imposed on Israel in this moment. And alongside that, we will be delivering a briefing that is explaining to them the current state of the Canada-Israel arms trade. And the reason why that's so crucial is because, as Rachel has so clearly laid out for us, we have consistently, including these brand new MPs who are coming into office, been fed lies about the state of the Canada-Israel arms trade. And it's crucial that these new MPs actually be told there are experts that have diligently put together so much research that actually exposes the lies that we are being fed and that you too have likely been fed and have been led to believe is factually, correct information. I also just want to lift up, this is a moment, yes, for us to engage these MPs, but it's also a really, really crucial moment for us to gather with our fellow constituents and to be able to sort of re-engage the people who maybe we were talking to throughout the federal election. If you're part of a local group or are seeking to join one, now is an opportunity for us to really re-engage as a movement and be able to absorb people who we've been connecting with through the federal election. So that is the plan for now, and I'm going to hand it over to Johanna from the Palestine Solidarity Movement, who also organizes with Davenport for Palestine, to talk more about this.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, thanks to all of you for coming and joining us on a Sunday afternoon. I just want to say before I get into our plan for June 5th that, as I'm sure, like many of you, I'm just witnessing the recent escalations in Gaza with so much horror and heartbreak. And the stakes really do feel just unbelievably high. And every day that we are not able to force our government to take these material steps to force Israel's hand, we know that hundreds and thousands of lives lie in the balance. So thank you for your ongoing commitment to this work and for coming out today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our plan for this kind of next step in the campaign. One of many. This is part of a wider movement effort, but as Emma said, we're planning this mandate delivery action on June 5th, and we're really hoping that people across the country will kind of pick this up and make sure that our newly elected government is hearing from us, as soon as possible. And that in this early window, as people are kind of the newly elected MPs are getting into power, as government is kind of figuring out what its direction is going to be, that they're really hearing from us loud and clear that what we expect from them and the kind of action that is needed in this moment. So as Emma mentioned, we are calling on folks across the country on June 5th to visit their MPs' offices and deliver them a clear mandate from their constituents, which is to sanction Israel through a 2-way arms embargo. The mandate letter that we are bringing to our MPs will include a briefing note to kind of overcome the rampant misinformation about the current state of the Canada-Israel arms trade. And we are in the process of compiling really up-to-date information with receipts and citations to help MPs, and especially these new MPs who've just entered office, in the last couple of weeks, really understand what's actually going on. We need to make Canada's complicity undeniable and really force our representatives to act with the urgency that this moment demands. So here's the plan. Can you go to the next slide, Emma? Thank you. So
here's what a mandate delivery could look like. The kind of unifying element across the country is that we are all going to be delivering this mandate letter to our MPs on the same day. So there's a really powerful kind of national story we can tell about communities across the country applying the same pressure on our MPs, giving them the information they need, giving them the concrete next steps, and pushing them to take action and forcing our government's hand. And we're going to be doing that all on the same day on June 5th across the country. But the kind of framing and tone and specifics of the action design really will depend on who your MP is and what your local context looks like. So I'm going to give a couple examples of what this could look like in different communities, depending on the kind of context that you're working with, on the MP that you're targeting. But just to echo what Emma was saying, we really are trying to be strategic and pragmatic with this. The point of this action is to really do things that might help us win this arms embargo. So it happens alongside the anger that we're releasing on the streets. Like many of you, I was, out on the streets of Toronto yesterday. This is part of a much bigger movement, but what we're trying to do here is like move these MPs to take the action we need in Parliament to help us actually win this specific demand. So that's the rationale here. So one example that this is the case for many people across the country is that you have a brand new Liberal MP. If this is you, our purpose with this particular action is really to invite them to support us in this campaign. They are probably being lied to by the media and by their own party leaders, just like we are. Many of them may genuinely not understand the status of the arms trade or the depths of Canada's complicity in this moment. So in this context, we're trying to think about opening the door of communication between your community or your organization and your new representative. Our goal with this action would be to secure a meeting with them. Like we're going in to deliver this letter and we're saying, we want to meet with you. Here's the information you need to know to do your job well, right? Here's what it would take for you to push for an arms embargo in Parliament. We're really trying to give new MPs a chance to support our call for an arms embargo before we then escalate to protesting them. So it can be helpful to let them know that we're planning to come. This decreases the likelihood of antagonizing them away from our cause and increases the likelihood of them actually letting you in with your letter. So unless you have a reason to believe that they're particularly antagonistic to our cause, which might be the case for some of us, depending on where we're living, we're really hoping with this action to kind of give them the information they need to pick a side and do their job. So we're going to be gathering outside of their office. We'd be sending a couple people in to meet with the staff. We try to keep our tone fairly courteous, even if we are, deeply angry and heartbroken about the situation. And we're actually making a case to the staff. So we'd be saying, here is a letter. We want you to deliver this to our MP. We are constituents of this riding. You are our new representative. We need you to know what's going on so that you can take the action that we are calling upon you to do, and that is really necessary in this moment. And for other folks, you may have a familiar face in the MP's office. I know many people here, I'm sure, have been organizing really hard in your ridings and targeting your MPs for many, many months. So I live in Davenport. I organize with Davenport for Palestine, and my MP is a bit of a mixed bag of a target. She's a longstanding Liberal MP, and we've been targeting her for 18 months. And at first, she really kind of parroted party line and Liberal talking points and for a long time. And then we were able to push her to move quite far with a combination of meetings and outside pressure. And so now she is actually one of the signatories to the Arms Embargo Now campaign. But she really does continue to repeat lies about how the flow of arms has already been stopped. So she's more supportive than some folks in the Liberal caucus on this demand, but seems to be under the impression that we've already implemented an arms embargo, which, as Rachel laid out so clearly, is obviously, sadly, not the case. So when we're designing our action, we're trying to strike the right balance and tone with our target, given that we've pushed her quite far, but also that many of us in her riding are deeply angry and disappointed by her lack of action and the way that she's talked out of both sides of her mouth to try to appease the Zionists in the riding. So in that context, we're still doing the delivery action. We're bringing the letter to our staffers and asking them to pass it on to our MP. We're planning on doing rolling deliveries all day. So we're sending in groups of, 2, 3, 4, 5 folks every 20 minutes throughout the whole day, trying to keep the tone diplomatic, but really insistent and persistent that we're getting the attention of her staff. We're not letting her forget about us. We're going to make it impossible for her to ignore the facts and really tell a compelling story about her constituents really being motivated and insistent around this demand. If you have a entrenched opponent, I see some people in the chat talking about this, an obvious enemy MP who won't be budged, and they won't be budged no matter what kinds of appeals you make, it's still powerful to do the mandate delivery. Getting them the briefing information makes it undeniable that they knew what was happening. So lots of MPs are doing this. I didn't know. If we've given them that information, it makes it impossible for them to pull that on us, which is useful. It's strategically helpful. And it also helps kind of elevate this demand across the country for us to be doing these deliveries at as many MP offices as possible. But in that context, if you've got a kind of opponent MP that you're not going to be able to sway, you can prepare to be a bit more confrontational. It might be more of a rally outside of their office if you can anticipate their staff won't let you in or won't receive the letter or actually have a conversation with you. You can always leave the letter in their mailbox or at their door, and that still helps tell this powerful story about people rising up and giving a mandate to their representatives. So I'm sure there's some chatter in the chat here. We do have like a toolkit and resources and are available to help support folks as you think about what this might look like. And I'm going to walk through some steps in just a second. But I really want to kind of express trust in people in this room. You know what best about what makes sense locally. For many of us who are plugged into riding groups, we've been strategizing and pressuring and campaigning against these MPs or their predecessors for many, many months. And really what we're trying to do is get as many MPs as possible to receive this letter from us directly, more likely from their staff people, and then be confronted yet again, new in their term, in their new term as in government, with the really urgent and desperate need to put an end to the Canada-Israel arms trade. Okay, do you mind going to the next slide, Emma? All right, so we prepared a toolkit, as I said, and if you go to armsembargonow.ca/mandate, which maybe one of my comrades can put in the chat, you'll be able to take a look, or you can feel free to look at it after this call. But it kind of lays out in a bit more detail some of the steps to plan an action like this. I will say that this is a fairly simple tactic, and that anybody here could do it. It doesn't require a huge team. It doesn't require huge amounts of prep or infrastructure or an organization behind you. Really, the power of this action is in numbers and is in us doing as many of them as possible and just really being consistent and committed in our support for this demand and in pushing our MPs to do what they need to do. So step one is to assemble a team. Again, if you're plugged into a riding group or another community organization, that's perfect, but you really don't need that many people to pull off a mandate delivery like this. You could really just tap, 4 or 5 friends, other people in your life who are equally heartbroken by the situation in Gaza and really motivated to do something in this moment, and invite them in to join you to do a letter delivery together. Your next step would be to choose your target. In most cases, this will just be whoever our MP is, but for some of us, if your organization spans several ridings, or if you live somewhere where you have access to a number of different MP offices, just geographically, we would say prioritize new Liberal MPs, because as Emma kind of laid out, the logic behind this action is really that we are trying to get these newly elected government officials to know what's going on and to have some sense of the campaign and the actual status of the arms trade. And I'll also say that because this isn't an action that requires big numbers, if you have the extra capacity to spread out, then we would encourage folks to hit multiple MPs. I know there are some organizations that kind of cover a couple different ridings, and if you could just split up and send, 5, 10, 15, 20 people to or even 3 to a couple different MP offices rather than all congregate at one, for an action like this that actually is more strategic, because we're trying to hit as many MPs as possible, and you don't need 100 people to pull off an action like this. It's really just about bringing the letter, trying to have that conversation. Ideally, you're talking to the staff, you're making your plea, you're presenting the information, and we're hoping that this is going to kind of trickle upwards through to leadership and help start to move the needle in this new caucus. Step 3 is to shape your approach based on your target. So this is some of what I was talking about earlier. The framing and design decisions are really going to matter. It'll depend on who your particular MP is, what your history with them is, what your local organizing context is. If you're an organization that has been targeting this MP for the last year, it's going to look a little different than if this is a fresh face and you're trying to kind of introduce yourselves as constituents, as an organization, as part of this wider movement for Palestinian liberation. But we really do trust your analysis of what makes sense. We would, again, just encourage you to not assume that new liberals or like newly elected MPs necessarily know what's going on. And if they are, assume they are persuadable until we find out otherwise. So if we can reach out to them, assume that they might be swayed by the facts. They might not be, we'll see. And you'll know more after your conversation with staff, after hopefully a meeting with your MP. But assuming that the facts might move them can be a useful orientation at this point, especially if you're dealing with a new face. Probably MP staffers are not going to let a rowdy crowd of protesters in the door. But if you have a hostile MP, that might not matter. But with those newer, more swayable ones, again, the point is actually to have that conversation with staff. So think about that when you're kind of planning out what your action is going to look like. Step 4 is to register your delivery. The location of the actions is at your MP's office, and the time should ideally be within office hours. So do a little bit of digging before you plan. Again, at that website, armsembargonow.ca/mandate, there's a link where you can fill out some information to help register your action. That helps us know that you planned a delivery at that MP's office, so we're able to keep track nationally at which MPs are already being targeted and make sure that nobody else is kind of claiming the same MP. It helps us spread our efforts more strategically. And in that form, you can decide if you want to invite the public to join you at your mandate delivery. For instance, if I were having a more public rally, I might want the time to be available on the website, put it on the map, like invite anybody else in my community to join me. If I'm just trying to go in and do a mandate delivery with my 4 buddies, I wouldn't necessarily want to make the time public. So again, all that information, it's possible to kind of be selective about what information you want to be public when you do that registration. But that really helps us support you and helps potentially recruit some new folks to join you if we can get a contact email address on the site. Step 5 is just to get ready for your mandate delivery. Again, the design of this is not flashy. It's simple. The general flow is to, meet up with your comrades and your co-organizers. You go to the office, you'd send a couple people in presenting the staff with the letter and kind of delivering a few key talking points. Again, we've got some advice and some scripts and ideas for how to do this in the toolkit. You'd be asking for a meeting. You'd be presenting the action, the next steps, concrete next steps that we want out of our MPs. And then after you leave, take some photos, maybe take a video explaining what your conversation with the staff looked like. Part of like any action, part of this is about telling the kind of wider national story about our communities delivering this mandate together. So trying to get that video and photos can be really key. The only mandatory roles you really need is like a spokesperson to do the talking to the staff and a photographer. But again, our toolkit has some other ideas if you're planning a slightly larger scale action. And we will also have that mandate letter. It's not quite ready yet. It's in the works, but we'll have that ready for you in the next week or two with enough lead time ahead of the day of action. Step 6 is just to do outreach and promotion. If you are inviting the public to join your action, I'm sure people here are now experts at how to do that, but we're happy to support you with social media graphics and other things. And then step 7 is to do the delivery. It's not super complicated or it's not high risk at all, right? This is a pretty manageable action, but we think it's a really strategic and important intervention in these early days of the new government to get our demands and get our information and get the facts in front of as many MPs as possible. So we're really hoping that as many people here as possible will sign up and that the people who receive the recording, the people who receive our wider calls will also sign up, and we can see how many MPs we're able to reach with this delivery. And we'll be able to then tell a really powerful national story about kind of all people across the country rising up and delivering this information to their MPs. And that will help us kind of rally them and hopefully advance the demand. So that's the plan for the delivery. I'm working with my comrades in Davenport to get our plans nailed down. I know there are some folks here who already have actions underway and planning has already begun. And we're looking forward to seeing more registrations come in and supporting you to deliver these mandates. And I'm just going to pass it quickly to Rachel to chat through something else we can do right now to help get this demand in front of our politicians' eyes.
Thanks. Yeah. So while we are preparing for this day of action on June 5th in 3 weeks to go to all the MPs across the country, we also want to recognize that brand new ministers have just come into office. And most importantly, we have a new foreign affairs minister, Anita Anand. So that is the office that's responsible for all the exports of weapons from Canada to Israel. And we have a new defense minister, McGuinty, who is responsible for all of the purchases of Israeli weapons from Canada, the other side of the arms embargo. And there's a brand new position, a Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. So another person whose specific job is like, what are these weapons Canada is buying from other places? So while we're all together here, we are going to take 2 minutes now all together on this call to immediately demand that these new ministers sanction Israel with an arms embargo. Again, an arms embargo is a type of sanction that is listed on the Global Affairs Canada website. It is something the government knows how to do and can be pushed to do. And we need to make sure that some of the very first emails these new ministers get demand they do that. So literally right now, all together on this call, we're going to do this together. We're going to click on this link that I just put in the chat, the one with the little orange star. And there you're going to fill in your name, your postal code, so that it can be writing specific information. And then a letter will show up. This letter, it says what I said, but it actually specifically breaks down like, hey, Anand, this is your specific role as Foreign Affairs Minister. Hey, McGuinty, this is your specific role as Defense Minister. Oh, and Prime Minister Carney, this is what we expect of you. So let's all take a moment. If we all do that now, that will be 258 emails that each of those ministers get today on a Sunday. And that will be something nice for them to show up and see when they come to their office first thing tomorrow morning. So I'm just going to watch kind of the numbers come in as we all send these letters now. Yeah, and if folks want to start throwing maybe like done in the chat, then I'll get a sense at some point of whether or not most people have had a chance to do it. While I wait for the last few folks to do it, I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat about when this other thing be important to do instead of this, or in addition to this, shouldn't we be doing this, or what about this? The answer is yes. We need to be doing all of those things. There's zero way in which the Arms Embargo Now campaign is trying to articulate that this is the single most important thing to do. And of course, yesterday there were protests across the country where tens of thousands of folks showed up for Nakba Day. That is so important. The continued more militant actions people are calling for are so important. We need to be doing all of it. This is one way that we're all coming together to put that really strategic, pointed, direct pressure on especially these brand new MPs, but all of them. But we are not trying to say that it is more important than anything else. We all need to keep doing everything we're doing. And if we do this one thing together, that will be a really important push from within Parliament, coming from all of these individual MPs. So I just want to again give a shout out to everything everyone has been doing. I'm now seeing, yes, the well over 200 people have now done the action. Thank you so much for doing that on the spot with that. And I'm going to pass us back to Shada.
Thank you, Rachel, Emma, and Johanna, for both the context and the path forward. And absolutely, this is one strategic intervention, one next step in line with everything else that has been happening. And of course, it is one step forward, and there are still many, many to go. So as we close, we return to why we fight and who we fight for. So we will close in the words of Hossam Shabat. If we could go next slide. Thank you, Emma. A Palestinian journalist who was martyred in Gaza and whose final letter reminds us why we do this work. So, to quote, when all of this began, and this was his letter that was found after he was martyred, his last letter that he had written. When all of this began, I was only 21 years old, a university student with dreams like anyone else. Over the past 18 months, I have dedicated every moment of my life to my people. I documented the horrors in northern Gaza minute by minute, determined to show the world the truth they tried to bury. I slept on sidewalks, in schools, in tents, wherever I could. Every day was a battle for survival. I endured months of hunger, yet I never abandoned my people. By God, I fulfilled my duty as a journalist. I risked everything to convey the truth, and now at last, I am at rest. something I have not known for the past 18 months. I did all of this out of the faith in the Palestinian cause. I believe that this land is ours, and the greatest honor of my life was to die in its defense and in service of its people. I ask you now, do not stop talking about Gaza. Do not let the world turn away. Keep fighting, keep telling our stories until Palestine is free. What we've heard today isn't just an update, it's a call, it's a responsibility, a mandate. Because as we end this webinar, Gaza is still under fire. Hospitals are still out of service. Families are still under rubble. Children are still starving, and Canada is still exporting weapons. So our path forward is clear. We have a strategic intervention. The time is now to deliver a coordinated, non-negotiable mandate for action, a full, permanent two-way arms embargo on Israel. Because every day that they delay, more people die. And we are done waiting. So to everyone on this call, this is your invitation. If you are a group, if you are a collective, if you are an individual, it is your time now to act. Plug in, organize, build, join the mandate for action, bring this demand to every MP that you can, because they will not stop unless we make them. Gaza is still standing, so we are still standing. Gaza has not surrendered, so we will not surrender and we will not back down. Thank you all again. Thank you to the organizers and everyone on this call. Arms Embargo Now and Free Palestine.